Hello, hi. So I'm back for day 24 of VEDA, and as promised, this is my recap conversation about Lovecraft Country episode 2. And this was an episode. Like, there were secrets revealed, we had a major loss, we had some craziness, and like the sci-fi fantasy element of things really ramped up. We got some answers, we got a whole bunch more questions, so let's dive right in. First of all, I want to say that there is actually a podcast, a companion podcast to the show. Now, there's plenty of people like myself and other folks who are doing their own recaps and talking about the show, but there's also a Lovecraft Country podcast that I made it a point to not listen to before I did this, so that I didn't, so that I could kind of speak about from my direct perspective and not be influenced by the awesome things that those ladies talk about, because they mentioned there's a horror fan on there. One of the ladies is definitely a horror fan, and so she talks about, that symbolism and the sci-fi and fantasy of it all, but I didn't want to have that color my perspective for this one, so I didn't listen yet. But I want to recommend that you do. It's a good time. They really do a deep dive. I will link down below so that you can check it out. I subscribe to it on Spotify, so I can listen to it on Spotify, but I'm pretty sure they're on Apple Music and, of course, as they say, anywhere you get your podcast. But it's also linked, if I'm not mistaken, it's linked to the website. So if you go to the HBO Lovecraft Country, I'm having a hard time saying that right now, website, there's a link to the podcast there. So definitely check that out. That is must listen to. I'll get my words together in a second. If you're watching Lovecraft Country, to just hear some analysis of the shows. With that, let me dive into my own analysis. So I had this whole plan. I have my little handy dandy notebook here, and I was watching it yesterday, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna take some notes so that I remember details. And once stuff started moving, there were no notes. There was this. So like, this is as far as I got. I figure that the more I watch it, I'll add on. But there were two things I wanted to mention that actually I saw in the preview from last week about the show. So, and I forgot about it when I was talking about it, but the creatures that were on last week's, the first episode that we actually learned a bit more about in this episode, they were attacking the cabin, and then suddenly you hear like what sounds like a dog whistle, and then the creatures stopped what they're doing and run off as if they are like trained pets. So that was definitely pretty quick foreshadowing. I'm sure, or I'm thinking it might come back up again, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sure after the end of this episode if they'll come back up, but they definitely were addressed more deeply in this episode. And then there was a woman who will definitely come up in this episode who seemed to be helping them in the first episode, and she was in like a big silver fancy looking car, and she was following them. She caused, when they were being chased out of the one town where they stopped by the restaurant, they were being chased by those people. She caused them to, wreck and maybe die, if not get really, really injured. And it was a white woman with, I think she had long hair in that shot. I might be combining what happened this week and last week, but she got out and she looked. And so definitely that was some foreshadowing that she was interested in them. So of course, this week we wake up and they are at this sprawling estate that we find out is the Lodge, Braithwaite Lodge. I'm gonna work on my pronunciations, but they're at this lodge and they walk in, and of course the guy opens the door and he's like, oh, we've been expecting you. So you see them, they're playing the Jeffersons at the first scene, and Leti is, dancing around, and she's taking a shower, and then she gets out, and like there's all these fantastic clothes that fit her perfectly, and so she's trying stuff on, she's having a fashion show, and then you cut to George, who is having his own moving on up moment, where he's also, getting dressed, and his room where he is in has a library, and it has all of these books that are his favorite books, and he's like, oh my god, this is fantastic, and they're living their best lives, while Atticus is in his room freaking out because he's like, yo, we just saw monsters that killed people, you know. And he's of course like internally, he definitely gives like brooding type of guy. So he's kind of just sitting there stewing and thinking about and having these thoughts about these things that attacked them and tried to kill them. And so then they hear a bell, and so their first thought is like, what is there? Is it an alarm? What's going on? So they all come out of their respective rooms, and they you know, Leti steps out and she's looking fly and fresh, and then, you know, they're looking refreshed, but Atticus is the only one who, of course, he's also showered and put on some of their clothes, but he doesn't look refreshed. He looks worried. But then the guy who answered the door shows up again, and he's like, oh, that's the lunch bell. So they go and they have lunch. And so now we're kind of getting into, okay, what is happening? Like, things feel odd, but like normal. Like they're being treated like guests, but it's like, how were you expecting us? How do you seem to know us? What are these? But the only person who seems to be asking questions, at least externally, is Atticus. Leti and George are like, what are you talking about? We're here, we got here, you know, we were in the car. So we quickly realize that they have no recollection of the attack by the critters. They have no idea what happened. They don't remember any of that traumatizing stuff that Atticus does. And so that's another clue, another sign that he is special in some way, because for whatever reason, he still fully remembers and they do not. And so now we're going through the episode, and they decide to explore the town, and they get to a center where it looks like a lighthouse. I think that's what it is. It's like a really tall, brick granite type of structure that's like a lighthouse. And so they walk up, they have this really that's when we go from, okay, yes, let's now back to reality, because the people are kind of looking at them oddly. There's a bunch of white people, of course, so they're looking at these black people like, who are y'all, where y'all come from? We reminded we're back in 1950s Jim Crow America. And then there's a woman who has these very aggressive looking, I think they're like Dobermans, like really trying to bite on people, like aggressively trying to chew at them. And of course she's holding them, and they're just like, can you get your dogs? Like, ma'am. But then she kind of goes like, you guys, like, why are you here? Type of thing, like, I'm about to sick these dogs and you can let them mess you up. And then George is like, we're guests of the Braithwaite, Mr. Braithwaite. And then she's like, oh. And so then she like holds up a hand and the dogs calm down. But in that interaction, they notice, she opens up, she goes to the, what looks like a lighthouse initially, opens it up, and it's like looks like a slaughterhouse inside, where there are like, pigs, there's meat, there's animals, but they're dead, but not like just arbitrarily dead, but like look like they're dead for meat to be eaten. And so of course it's still all very threatening though. So the exchange with her, super negative. They run back. They're like, all right, we gotta get out of here. And then they're like, we're headed back to, and she says the same thing, don't be out here after dark. You need to get back to the lodge, I think is what they call it, before dark and also before the dinner bell. And so they're just like, it still feels like, some sundown town type of warning. So they're like, all right, we'll go. And then they go, and they're again in the woods, and they're walking, and it's like, we gotta get back. And then all of a sudden, the creatures show up again, but this time, they're burrowing through the ground, and then they pop up, and like two or three of the creatures surround them. And so they're just like, oh my God. But of course they're covered in dirt because they come up from the ground and kind of like stand up and like are all towering over them. And then you hear the dog whistle again. The same lady who was just super racist and rude walks up with her aggressive dogs, but then so does the lady who had been kind of watching them and following them in her car. She pulls up on a horse and she blows her whistle, and then the creatures run away. And immediately George and Leti are like, what? Why am I covered in dirt? What just happened? Why are we out here in the woods? And so Atticus is like, they don't remember what's going on. So they make their way back to the lodge, and they're there, and George and Leti are taken to their rooms, and then Atticus and the woman go see the woman's father, who is the owner of the lodge. I think his name is Samuel Braithwaite. And so then we find out Braithwaite. And so then we find out more about where they're staying and kind of what it is. And so it's a lodge. It's like a I won't say a secret society. It is a secret society, but it's kind of like the Masons, or maybe the Shriners. Like, it's a society of people that meet up. But this is kind of their big house. Like, this is where the leaders of the group come together, and he's like the leader of the group. He's the supreme leader of the group, and he is having a meeting. Now, when Christina is her name, and Atticus go to his room, first of all, they walk in and there's a man laying on the laying on a table, like an operating table type of situation, but it's 1950, so it looks a little bit not so modern to my eyes, and he is being cut on, like they're doing something to him, and he's screaming and yelling, and then I'm just like, oh right, because they probably don't have anesthesia, like that doesn't look like an operating room. And then the person pulls an organ out of his body. The person takes the organ, goes about like, okay, thanks, sews him back up and heads out. And then he stands up, and of course is weakened because he just had an organ removed, and he kind of talks to him, and we establish that he is he's the owner of the lodge, but Titus Braithwaite was the person who built it, and that's like he's a descendant of him. And then we find out that the woman Christina is his daughter, so she's also a descendant, and he's in a group called the Sons of Adam. So this is some people might automatically assume that this is kind of like some Illuminati type of stuff, but I think for me likened it more so to like an order, like the Masonic order. And I'm not comparing them to Masons because I don't know much about the Masons, because I'm not an Eastern Star, which for Prince Hall, if you're a black person, because first of all, black people weren't in the Masons as was talked about, as George mentioned later on. But for black people, as a woman, I would be an Eastern Star. As a man, you'd be a Freemason of Prince Hall. So I don't know anything about it because I'm not a member, but I will say it gave me a similar thought to that. Those are just like fraternal organizations that were created as a way for to establish, I don't know. I can't think of a way to eloquently explain what fraternal organizations do, but it's just a way for people to come together with common interests to work together to support those common interests. Some instances, it's very social, where it's just like a social club. People get together just to, enjoy, have a good time, kind of have a place to go to be with people that are like you. In other instances, it's more about organizing around, a cause, organizing around a specific issue, organizing around leaders, just like the secret societies that you hear about at the different at some of the different like Ivy League colleges, where like they have these secret societies and they're created really just to form a network of people who will always kind of help you be successful, and you get in them, and once you're in them, like your trajectory in life, it puts you in the room with people that you may not normally otherwise be in the room with them by virtue of proximity or wealth if you are of a certain, have a certain amount of means, etc. So it just kind of, it gave me one of those. And so I know that there are, as most people might not believe it, I believe there's like multiples of those types of organizations that are around. And so this was kind of an example of that. And so we got to see and hear him talk about it. And in this one, they're sons of Adam. And so it's rooted in the idea that they are directly descended from or connected to Adam, from the Bible. So, of the Adam and Eve variety. So now we get into kind of creationism. And we also figure out that there's some type of, the guy, Simon Braithwaite, I need to find his name because I am not using people's proper name. First of all, it's Fitz from Scandal. That's how I most well know him, but he's been in a bunch of stuff. But Fitz from Scandal is the guy, and he has a plan clearly. Like they're there for a reason. The reason why they haven't immediately been either cast out or killed or whatever is because he has a reason for, at least for Atticus to be there. And so we have kind of started to put things together and realize that Atticus is, he's a descendant of, he's very likely a descendant of the Titus Braithwaite as well. We realize that his, however many greats grandmother was likely raped by him, and I was trying to raped by him and gave birth to, and that created a line through his mother. So and he is the final living descendant because his mother has since passed on. So that is also why we're like, oh, this is why there's a connection here. And so he is essentially a cousin of some sort to Christina. They're relatives, so she's not trying to holler, they're related. But that is what we kind of figure out what's happening. And another thing that they kind of figure out by virtue of just being observant is when they go to that, what I thought was maybe a lighthouse, what looks like a slaughterhouse, is that it looks like a prison, it looks like a jail, but also that those kinds of structures in that time, if you have this tall stone structure like that, very likely there's like a stone basement. And so they realize, you know what, maybe my dad is what Atticus and George realized, maybe my dad is being held there. Because they're like, where's my father? No one will answer. They'll be like, they keep saying, he left and we can't really tell you what's happening. I don't really know. It's not my business to tell you, which is what the one guy says. So it's like, maybe he's in there. So they basically come up with an idea. We're gonna go back and get him. But before they go back and get him, they realize that there's for dinner. It's time for dinner. But before that, I'm jumping around. I'll get smoother with this. Before it's time for dinner, Atticus and Christina are talking. Now that her dad has kind of said his things and talk about, being the son of Adam and how he has a plan and you're going to stay here because they have a ceremony. He mentions the ceremony. And so then he leaves. He really doesn't want to have anything to do with Atticus. But he pretty much confirms that Atticus is a descendant of Titus Braithwaite, which makes them relatives. He's like, you have my blood and you, albeit tainted because he's black. But that of course connects us to the whole, I guess, being a black person, a black American person, who, when you start tracing your lineage back, you kind of hit, it's funny, whenever you watch like the shows where they trace people's background, whenever you get someone who is, and I'm specifically saying black American, whenever you get a black American person, very often they hit like the slavery wall, where it's like you go, and then you hit like slavery and you're like, okay, this is, now we can go no further back because we don't know. But in some instances, for some people, when they hit the slavery wall, then they hit the slave master wall, the slave master route. And so then it goes from black to, now we're tracing your white lineage, whatever European country they might be from, and then you kind of go down that world. And so that is, we're seeing that happen through this show. And I say Black American because when you see people who are of different parts of the diaspora, so whether they're from the continent directly, like that's where like they can take themselves back to the continent, or they are Caribbean, they can go back. And so people who are Caribbean, they of course hit their own wall sometimes, their own colonization wall as well. It just looks different. So that's what happens. We see it happen in real time, and we're like, okay, but he's a descendant. He has now been connected with his family, but on the white side. And apparently he is valuable, but they don't know why yet. But while he's talking to Christina, he realizes that Christina has done something. She spelled Leti and George so that they don't remember the craziness that happened with the creatures. And so he says to her, like, take that off. They need to know that there's imminent danger, because like you can't prepare for danger. Like, they could have died in those woods because they didn't know that there were potentially creatures in there, whereas he did, because he was being very cagey, because he knew, like, wait, is there some are they gonna jump out at us? Like, what's going on? So what she immediately takes it off, and you hear them both begin to freak out. So this also goes into kind of the writings and the themes of Lovecraft, where one of his big themes is that you have this world that exists that's beyond our level of recollection as humans, because we are just not of monsters and creatures, and they're real, they're out there. We just don't recognize or see them because we're just not able to. But we're also not able to comprehend. So like, just by virtue of experiencing them, it will cause us to lose our minds, because we can't process that level of horror and that level of macabre kind of beings and creatures out there. We can't process that as people. And so a lot of times in some of his stories, people will go mad because it's like, I just can't. And so them freaking out is a direct indicator of that. And so then we're back at Atticus's room. He steps in, but then he asks her to take it off. He hears them freaking out. He tries to go to them and can't. So there's like a spell barrier that won't let him leave. And so then we get into the fantasy and the scary, horrific fantasy, where all three of them are unable to leave their rooms. They're essentially being held prisoner. But then all three of them experience something from their mind. George sees Atticus's mom. And so it hinted to it in the first episode that there might have been a relationship that they had that wasn't like platonic, like she wasn't the homie. They might have dated or been involved. But when she shows up here, it's confirmed that they obviously love each other and have a very tender affection towards each other. In Leti, which is interesting enough, but not surprising, because I figured that they would probably try to make her and Atticus love interest in some capacity. I don't know how deep it's gonna go, but definitely he shows up into her room and is like, are you okay? I heard you screaming. She's like, yes. So of course he shows up. She was afraid. She calms down. She feels safe because he's there. So there's that. And then of course they have a moment, they kiss, they start making out, and it's about to go down. And then it cuts to Atticus's room, where he's being attacked by a woman, and I can't remember who. I'm gonna do better with my research. Where he was fighting the war, wherever the war was at. I don't know if it was Vietnam. I'm guessing, but I'm terrible with historical facts without doing the research, and I did not do the appropriate amount of research to just confirm what war that he had just come back from. But he is fighting a woman who he knows and has a relationship with. And so she like comes out of nowhere and is attacking him, and he's like, I'm not going to fight you. And like, he's basically keeping her off of him. Like, he's doing defensive blows, but he's not offensively trying to attack her. And like, when she goes, like, she stabs him, like, it becomes obvious that she's going to kill him if he does not kill her first. And they're trapped in this room. So ultimately he ends up killing her. Then while at the same time George is having this very lovely, you know, dance with Atticus's mom, and Leti is about to get it in with Atticus, but she kind of puts the pause. She's like, wait, I don't, you know, no, wait, let's just stop. And but he doesn't stop. He keeps going, and then he pulls his pants down, and a snake comes out, and it's like, okay, symbolism. I didn't even get a chance to really process what that might mean. I definitely know it's kind of, you know, the whole Adam and Eve, and kind of how obviously them being sons of Adam, they definitely don't seem to hold women. And even after the conversation that Christina has and kind of talks about with her dad when they're in the dungeony medical room looking place, that they don't hold Eve in very high regard, because they look at her as she's the reason why, you know, they were cast out of the Garden of Eden. She's the one who got, you know, engaged with the snake, because she says there is a common misconception that the snake fed Eve an apple, but really it means there was sex. So it means that Eve had sex with the snake. I think that's what they're, so it kind of connects when Leti is about to have sex with Atticus, because it's not Atticus, and then he pulls his pants down, and it's a snake that comes out of his pants, and then she's kind of running from the snake. So all of this is happening. They're in the middle of all this craziness. Of course, George, because he's older and wiser, and because he's older and wiser, so he realizes, oh, this, and he tells Atticus's mom, you're not real. And she says, I know, but let's dance anyway. So he's already aware that this is not reality, but it feels nice, and so he's just gonna let it happen, but he knows that she's not real. And so they're talking, and we kind of start to get a little bit of hint that George and Atticus's mom had something going on. Maybe George is Atticus's father. You know, he's definitely been a father figure, and it could help explain why Montrose, Atticus's father, and has such a, their relationship is so contentious, because there might be that level of, I don't know if you're my real biological son. And so that could be, because you know that happens when you have those situations where paternity or who the parent is either dubious or often dubious, or people have kind of decided to step in. There's sometimes resentment, and so that could be what's causing this. But we're starting to get a little bit of hints. But before we can dig any deeper into this, the dinner bell rings, and they come out of the room, and of course Atticus and Leti are all flustered and abused, and they've been fighting a battle. And then that's when George pulls them both, and they're like really freaking out, and the guy's like, oh, there's dinner, but he says, you know, women aren't allowed, but you can eat on the veranda, and it's black tie. So, but before they go and kind of get dressed, George pulls them three together into a hug, because he can tell that they have been through some tomfoolery, because he knows if he had some weird stuff happening for him, then they probably did too. He can just tell whatever their weird stuff was, it was aggressive and it got into their heads. And he just like, don't let them get into your head. You know, just don't let them get to you. You can be this. You know, he gives them a fantastic dad like pep talk and hugs them both, and it's like, oh, that's so wonderful. And immediately you're thinking, it's so awesome that they have him as this wise guiding figure going on what I think still is this hero's journey. So we flip, and now George and Atticus are all black tied up, and everybody's snazzy, and they are going into the room where there are other men that are in black tie, and they're seated at the table, and the other guys are at the table, but of course they're looking at them oddly because they're the only black men. But of course, the dude, Simon, I need to look up, I don't see his name. He's like, of course they're looking at you, they're just not used to you seeing here, but you belong here. And so we're just like, all right, they belong there, so that's all right, that's fine. But of course, something else has happened. So while George was in his room, I'm going back, while he was in his room, he there's a library, and so there's a book that's a little askew. So he just reaches, it's like, oh, this book is out of place. He picks it up, and the door opens, and he realizes he's in a secret room, a whole secret hall that's huge. And then he sees, it looks like it's where they meet. So he finds the book of bylaws, and he reads them, because he is a man that seeks knowledge, and he actively, when he sees things like that, he does research. And so he reads the bylaws, and then, you know, now we're here, now we're in the room. And so, and because and as he says it, so they're sitting there, they got this where it starts to get creepy, but I figured it would. The guy, Samuel, that's his name, I just looked up his name. Samuel, you know, comes in, he's wearing a hood, which is already like, really, a hood, bruh? So he's wearing like a robe, a hooded robe, and he's like, all right, we're here. Thank you guys for coming, and thank for you giving of your time to me. I want to give of myself to you. And then they bring out these plates with these small slices of like a rare meat. Now, we saw earlier that Atticus walked in and something was being taken from his body. So we are to assume that whatever that was, maybe his liver, was sliced up and divvied out for all of them to have a piece of him, which, ill, but it's, we can tell what they're on. So of course, Atticus sees that and he's like, don't eat that. So then George is like, all right, I think I got an idea. So he stands up and he's like, well, because now they've realized that Atticus is obviously a blood descendant of the owner of this particular lodge. And so the Artem Lodge, that's what it is. He's a blood descendant. And so George is like, you know what? Because he's a Mason, he's a Prince Hall Mason, and so he understands bylaws and parliamentary procedure and things like that, because that is how a lot of those organizations and societies run their meetings. It's very parliamentary procedure oriented, or very much parliamentary procedure, like there's often a parliamentarian at the meetings. And so he kind of goes through and realizes that, and what he basically says is that if someone is a direct descendant of the founder of this order, that means they have the ability to tell you what to do. And so Atticus is like, words. He stands up and he's like, all y'all get out except for you. And he's talking to Samuel. So then all the guys slowly leave, and then he's kind of like, what is going on? What's happening? And so then they're like, well, we're out. So they leave and they are like, we're gonna go get my dad. So now they have a plan. They're moving, they're in action. They're going to the place. Now Leti, we don't know where Leti is at this point. Leti is supposedly having dinner on the veranda. But these two guys are going back to that the village where they have the stone structure, and they're going down to the bottom to find Montrose. And so they find him, and then, as a fan of Poe, I enjoyed this. So they're in the, they don't immediately find him, and they're like, where is he? And then what George is like, oh, Cask of Montedillo. And that's a very common, that's a story by Edgar Allan Poe, where this guy is bricked up in a wall where he dies. And then they pull the bricks out of the wall. They find an empty tomb. Montrose has gotten out because he's apparently quite industrious. So he's made it out, but they're able to kind of finally interface. And then all three of them are all kind of like, what's happening? Hey, what's up? They get in their car because Leti shows up with the car, save the day. And then they're trying to leave. They're about to cross the bridge and they hit one of those barriers again, and everybody's kind of jacked up. And then Samuel pulls up and proceeds to shoot Leti. Leti is now laying and dying. Of course, Atticus is distraught, but then Leti dies. Then you have George and Montrose standing there, and Samuel is like, I want to punish you for this, infraction that you just made. You made this decision to try to leave and escape. I'm punishing you. And he shoots George. So then we cut, and now we get to see a little nudity. We get to see a little Atticus nudity. And we cut, and Atticus is being washed for the ceremony. So he's naked, we just see the back, but he obviously works out, so yay. We see the back, they're washing him down, they're putting on a robe similar to the one that oh boy Samuel has on. And now they're about to start this ceremony. And Atticus is in this room, and then you see that it's been spelled, and then you see George is laying on the bed. He's shot, but he's still alive. Montrose is kind of trying to tend to George, and Letty's laying on a couch, but she's dead. Like, obviously she's laying there dead. But while they're talking, Leti comes back to life. And so Christina is standing with him, and she's like, she's about to put the ring of the order on him. She's like, don't worry, we'll heal your uncle. We'll heal the other guy as well. But before they can heal them, oh boy, Samuel starts the ceremony. And this is where I think where we start to see that there's more to it than even Samuel knows, because he's doing the ceremony. He puts Atticus in the middle because he needs his blood in order to be able to do it. And it's happening, his blood is working, but something goes wrong and the people end up being turned to stone. Now, Christina has left. So it's really just the guys in there are turned to stone. So Samuel's turned to stone. Some of the other guys are turned to stone. But while this is happening, but this is a kind of a long process. We cut to the room with George and Montrose are talking. So Leti is trying to like, she's freaking out because she just died. And so I think that something happens there that we'll see later, but she died. And so she's like curled up on the floor, kind of in the fetal position, crying because she knows she died, but she knows she's no longer dead and alive. And now she's alive. George and Montrose are on the bed. This is when we get confirmation that it's very possible that Atticus is George's son or Montrose's son. And I think we get confirmation that Atticus is George's son, that it's very likely that he is George's son, but that Montrose decided that he was going to raise him. And so George is like, he knows he's not going to make it because he's been shot, he's been mortally wounded. And he's like, Montrose, you need to take care of him because he knows he's not gonna make it. So all of this stuff is happening. They're going through their thing. We get this confirmation, major secret, major, this is definitely gonna come back. I'm 100% sure it's gonna come back in some way. But then Leti, of course, as she's paying attention, hops up again. And so it's definitely I get the whole black women save the day. I don't know that that's what's happening here though. I think this is a bigger story about Leti and her power and her ability to see when she can sense when it's time to move, and then she also has the ability to move people. I think that's going to come up in some way, and that's important when you're in kind of a horror sci-fi movie. There has to be someone who can tell when the danger is imminent and when everyone needs to get out. Everyone doesn't always listen, but there's often a person that's kind of like hey, this is not looking good, we should peace. And so she's definitely been that person so far by episode 2. And so of course, again, she gathers everybody up and she's like, we gotta go, because she sees, they can see into where Atticus is, that things are starting to, oh no, the room is starting to get loose. So they're like, she's like, it's about to get real in here, we gotta get out. So George is on the bed, they pick him up and he's like, he'll bleed out if we go. And she's like, yeah, but if we don't go, we all die. So they're like, okay. So they're running, they're trying to get to the car. Of course, Atticus is going through the ceremony, things are going awry. His ancestor pops up, again, black woman. She's like, hey babe, you know, my great whatever son. She sees him and she basically guides him out while things are starting to collapse. So the Artem Lodge is collapsing, but Atticus is able to barely make it. He gets out, he runs outside, he sees the car. So he gets to the bridge, he sees the car, he sees Leti. Leti runs up to him, they run together, you see like the hug, oh my God, you're alive, I can't believe it. And then Leti shakes her head and we know it's George. George didn't make it. And when I tell you, the writing and Courtney B. Vance, because he be acting, for him to be so beloved so fast, in this, like, this is the second episode. We should not be connected to any character, but we are connected to George, and George did not make it, and we are devastated. And by we, I include myself, because I was like, oh my God, I just knew George was gonna make it, and he didn't make it. And so now we know that George may be Atticus's father, but now Atticus just lost the person who played his father role, because him and his dad obviously did not get along. They did not have a lot in common. Him and George did. They had a definitely father-son type of relationship, even as an uncle. But Montrose is there. He's alive. And it ends with them, everyone is just kind of crying and sobbing, and it's so sad and it's so heart-wrenching. But at the end of it, we're still left with a lot of questions. So now we know, Artem, we know what Artem is. We know that Atticus has, his bloodline is connected to it by virtue of his mother. But we also now know that Leti, there's something special about Leti now, beyond what there already was. I do have a feeling that we'll see George again. He's an ancestor now, but I have a feeling we'll see him again. But then we also see that Christina wasn't in there. So while the place collapsed, and Samuel and the other lodge members who were there at the ceremony were turned to stone and then dust, Christina wasn't there. So where was she? We don't know. So there's definitely some things that are up in the air, and we don't really know how this is going to play out. But we do know that they're going back to Chicago because they have to tell everyone that George has died on this latest journey. And so now we get to the previews for next week, which I think we're back in Chicago, and we're seeing Hippolyta. I was trying to find a way to pronounce it. I keep missing when they say it. I forget. She doesn't trust what is happening. And she's another character that I think is going to show us power beyond what we think. She definitely is. Now, in the next episode, Leti gets a house. We don't know how, we don't know from where. I'm sure we'll find out something, but she ends up with this house. And so I think that is gonna become kind of the center of their place. But also there's going to be questions asked. And a cool thing that I noticed when I was just kind of reading about the series was that, the daughter, her name is Diana Freeman, Hippolyta. If you are familiar with the Wonder Woman canon, Wonder Woman's real name is Diana, and Queen Hippolyta is her mother. So I like that interesting connection, because that tells me that Hippolyta, I think we're going to get more from her, and I think we're going to get more from Diane, but I don't know what yet. I'm still, because we just met them briefly in the first episode, so we really don't know. But something tells me that these characters are going to definitely play an important role in the story. So I'm definitely excited to see that. But this episode, I like that it brought us deeper into the story. We got to meet some characters. We got some questions answered. We got some questions asked. And we lost a beloved character. So what I said last week was that I thought that this was going to be a hero's journey with the three of them. I still believe it's a hero's journey, but now I'm seeing that it'll be with Atticus and Leti, their hero's journey, and what that means. And Hippolyta, actually, it could still very well be a hero's journey that George began, that Hippolyta finishes, because that's not uncommon, where someone close to the hero might die, and then someone close to them picks up their steed and finishes the journey on their behalf. That's possible. We'll see. We don't know, because we're living in a world where what is true, what we see in front of us, is not always true, and the worlds collide. So it's very possible. So we will see. But I would love to hear what you think. What do you think about what's going to happen next? What do you think about last night's episode? Were you as saddened as I was at the loss of George? What are your thoughts? Down below. Let's talk about it in the comments, because I'm curious how other people are experiencing this, as I'm experiencing it, kind of fangirling out from horror perspective, but also from enjoying the historical context, enjoying these actors and just kind of their chemistry. What are you enjoying? What are you liking? What are you not liking? What are you curious about? All those good things. I am doing snake. But yeah, so let me know your thoughts down below. This was longish. I don't know. I'm gonna try to tap into the themes more as we kind of get along. I'm definitely gonna do that, but I would love to hear from you. This is cool. This is fun. I look forward to the next time that we can chat again. Bye.